at the crisis or series of crises in the Middle East, there are some really interesting academics and some colleagues of mine in Israel and in the Palestinian territories who will talk about how many of the peace processes have been a convening of the liberals from both sides. Like, you've probably heard the joke, like, your heretics and our heretics, they'll get together and they'll sign a heretical deal. But for some people, and I would say growing majorities even, or growing towards majority in both Palestinian society and Israeli Jewish society, you have people who say, I can't agree to those borders because my deal about borders is with someone upstairs. Like, that's who gave us this land. I can't end all claims to this territory because it was given to me by God. Or my goal isn't a peace agreement that maximizes individual rights and liberties. I actually want community obligations. I don't want individual liberties. That's not what I'm about. And so what do you do with those people? Like, they don't honor international boundaries and they don't aspire for more individual rights. They're not liberals. They're not neoliberals. They're like illiberals. And people don't want them at the table because it's offensive. It's outside the norms. There won't be peace there or here unless those people are included on their terms, not on our terms, in the debate about the future.
Welcome. Maybe you are old enough to remember when we could actually sit down and have civil conversations about subjects that today have become hair triggers. I can remember when I and others who maybe voted differently or believed differently or even prayed differently could sit across from each other and have these healthy, yes, energized, but civil banter. We could potentially even walk away with a new understanding of those who thought differently about things. As you are no doubt aware, those days seem to be little more than stories and fading fables. Today, the same media that censors every word so that we have to say stupid stuff like, he unalived himself, is also busy on the other side pouring gasoline onto these fires of political discourse. Today, we ask, is there a way back to having courageous conversations that have us growing in compassion rather than shrinking into the density of fixed opinions? And if so, how? Welcome to the Dov Baron Show. Come for the stories, stay for the learning. I'm your host, Dov Baron. I advise high-performing leaders, organizations, how to harness their emotional source code to purposefully transform their tribe. Today on the Dov Baron Show, our guest for the next 2 episodes is Simon Greer. He is the master of conducting exactly the kind of courageous conversations the world is desperate for right now. Simon is a leading bridge builder, strategist, and a storyteller at the intersection of faith, politics, and social change. So he's got a few things to offer us. He's the founder of Bridging the Gap, a national initiative that trains the next generation of civic leaders to engage across differences with honesty and courage. At a time when polarization is tearing across the fabric of the United States, Simon Greer offers a powerful vision, practical tools, and how we might disagree better and live together more wisely. More on that in a moment. You're tuned into the Dov Baron Show. Each episode is the exploration of the minds of those who are shaping the world. Every episode is raw, it's unscripted, and it's a collaboration between my guests and me as we dive into the truths that few have the courage to ask. We find guests for you who are sometimes unknown to the general public, but absolute titans in their field, the kinds of people that high-profile leaders turn to when they need an edge. If you're the kind of leader who craves depth over sound bites, hit that subscribe button right now, because this is where real thinkers come to sharpen their edge. This is more than a podcast. This is a strategic olive branch offered while swallowing the hard pill of compassion. Dear listener, please turn up the volume and help me to welcome founder of Bridging the Gap and a senior advisor for One Voice United and the founder and president of Cambridge Heath Ventures, Mr. Simon Greer. Welcome, sir.
Thanks so much. Pleasure to be here.
I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Our previous conversation was invigorating, and I think there's a lot to learn for everybody who can maybe take on a lot of what you've got to offer. But before we do that, I sort of want to do a bit of backstory because, as I said, politically we've been polarized, and to some degree, maybe some of that was due to your past career. So is the work you're doing today an act of redemption?
In some ways, I think it is. Some ways, I think it is. Well, it's good to be here. Maybe I'll just take a step back. So I grew up in a left-wing Jewish family on the Upper West Side in Manhattan, in New York City. And when I say left-wing Jewish family, I don't mean like a liberal family. Like I grew up in a family where whether you're a communist or a socialist was like a relevant conversation. I went to Jewish communist summer camp. Some people don't even know there's such a thing as a Jewish communist summer camp. It was called Camp Kinderland. I think it's still around. There aren't that many Jewish communists left, but I think the camp is still there. And, the camp, it did leave an indelible mark in a lot of good ways. Bunks in a lot of camps are named after like trees. There are maples and pines and sequoias. Our camp, they were named after giants of social change. Emma Lazarus, Paul Robeson, Goodman, Schwerner, and Cheney. Since we're in the midst of summer, people are probably thinking like, you have Camp Olympics. It's usually blue versus gray. But our Olympics, every team was named after a country in anti-colonial struggle. I was on Vietnam one year. Like, that's the culture I grew up in.
So you grew up with sort of a political ideology. You were in it. And in many ways, some might describe that as a cult mentality.
And maybe it's true about cult mentalities. It's like the water you were raised in. I was marinated in social justice. Like, that's what we did.
Right.
I actually believe that's what all Jews did. I didn't know there were other Jewish people who believed other things. I just thought, being Jewish, it's kind of a prophetic tradition. Like you believe you risk it all to make the world a better place. That's what we're here to do.
And I think in many ways that talks to where we're going to go in this conversation, because one of the things I love to remind people of is normal isn't healthy. Normal's just whatever you grew up with, whatever you got used to. And so if you grew up in this communist Jewish camp, okay, that's what kind of in your brain as a kid, that's the way the world is. You don't think of it as any other way. And if you've been brought up in a right-wing nationalist Christian group, you kind of think that that's the way it is too, until you don't.
Yeah, 100%. I have this very vivid memory. I was a tennis player in high school, and I went to tennis camp in rural Pennsylvania. I moved into my room like everybody does at the start of the season. It's like summer session. And my roommate was a white kid, and he put a cross up over the door. And I was like, interesting. So I went to the payphone. We had payphones back then, and called home. And I said to my dad, I think I just met a white Christian. He laughed. He's like, what do you mean? I don't know. I kind of thought either you were black or Jewish. Like, isn't that who we are? And he said, welcome to America. I think it's to your very point. Like, I grew up in the Upper West Side in New York City in the 70s and the 80s. It was a certain ethos to the place. And you could go through my life experience thinking most people are black or Jewish. That's who we mostly encounter. And of course, that's not who the country mostly is. And other people grow up other places. They never cross paths with a Jewish person or a black person.
No, and in so many ways, that speaks so much to where we are today. One of the things you and I chatted a little bit about in our previous conversation is that how many Americans don't have passports, have not traveled. Many of them have not left their own state. I talk about tribes, and in many ways, your state is a tribe. You got your familial tribe, maybe your faith tribe, maybe your greater family tribe, but then you've got your state tribe. And if you never move out of that tribe, it's pretty easy to think that that's the way the world is. They're asking people on Hollywood Boulevard, where's Alabama? I don't know. It's like, people in Alabama, where is New York? I don't know. It's the mindset that seems to me as being really, instead of broadened and opened, is being fed that your tribe is the tribe. And we're the only ones who support your tribe.
Yeah, though I want to push on this one for a minute, because I think sometimes there's a framing of this dilemma that like the worldly people are the ones who have transcended tribe, and they see that we're all one and we're all united. And those poor idiot tribalists are back there defending their little parochial way of life. It exudes a kind of disdain for small town life. And I think it's one of the real tragedies of the way this bridging stuff has been framed. Because for me, I don't at all aspire to one kumbaya, common good, we're all the same. If we just bridge enough, we'll all agree that all our traditions roll up into one. I think the real art of bridging or pluralism or whatever you want to call it. The real art is that people want to hold on to that small town where everyone went to the same church and they felt safe walking down the street and everyone spoke the same language they did. But as I say it, I think, oh, they're going to already come after me. I've been on the show 8 minutes. He's a racist. He's xenophobic. But all I'm saying is it isn't by nature bad that you want to belong to your place and your people. Like, I'm Jewish. Our story isn't the disciples of Jesus. Our story is the Exodus story. That's our story. Other people can share in the story, but we brought that story to the world, and that's a great gift. Our kids should be proud of that story, and other people should benefit from the story. And so for me, the idea needs to be that you can be deeply grounded in your worldview and your convictions and your tribe, and your tribe doesn't have to compete with other tribes. It could actually collaborate with other tribes. And I think that's a step that's sometimes skipped over.
I am so glad you pushed back on that, because that is such an important point, that it's very easy to get on that high horse and, oh, I'm a traveler and I've been around the world. I've also lived in very small places. There's a wonderful sense of, in a very positive way, tribe that takes place there too. I think it's those who are playing us into the tribes that's the problem. It's not that we have a tribe, it's that we're being played into the tribe to the extent that anyone out of the tribe wants to kill us or make us wrong, and therefore we have to hold them as an enemy, and that's just not true. And I know that that's the foundation of your work, is that it's not true. I can respect your tribe, you can respect my tribe. I don't have to give up my tribe, you don't have to give up your tribe, but let's find a way to understand each other's tribe, and maybe there's some common ground.
If we accept that I'm unlikely to vanquish your tribe from the planet or from the nation, then I'm left with some other choices I need to take. One choice could be, and I believe in this, let's call this choice bipartisanship, that your tribe and my tribe might find some things we agree on, and maybe we could work on them together. That's great. I'm all for that. This other thing we're talking about is, but what about the things where our tribes fundamentally disagree? And is there a way that we can work together on the bipartisan, common ground stuff, and we can learn to honor and craft a way to live together on the stuff that's like deeply irreconcilable? And I think that's the really interesting edge. Everyone hasn't agreed they want to move forward and make progress toward oneness, right? Some people do, and that's beautiful, but other people want to hold back, stay tight and narrow and bound. And can we honor and collaborate through that boundedness rather than just doing this?
To me, that's the most interesting part of your work, because I think that most people who are reasonably open-minded would say, yeah, I'd like to find a bipartisan space, a way for us to come together. But you're talking about something way beyond that, Simon, and I think that this is really important, is there are places where we will never come together. And how do we have conversations that are more than respectful, but honoring, I guess is probably better, honoring of that? Talk to us more about that, because I think that that's probably the most difficult thing of all. I can get that I'm an evolved human being and I'm looking for where we're bipartisan and now we can come together. We both believe in family, right? We'll come together on family. Okay. But what about this? This thing we fundamentally disagree upon. That's the work you're doing that I think is rare.
Yeah. Well, a couple of examples come to mind, maybe to bring this to life a little. So I have a friend, Elizabeth. She was a student in one of the first Bridging the Gap classes that I offered. She's evangelical. And she once said to me, Simon, you mean the world to me, and I've learned so much from you, and you do such beautiful, honorable work, and I just think it's terrific. And it kind of breaks my heart that you just won't have eternal life. That's kind of bigger than how did you vote? It's like, fundamentally think I'm going to hell, and you're not. And a number of people said to me after she and I had this conversation in private, we've had it on stage in public, and people said, like, why did you need to go there? Isn't it fine that you two respect each other, have learned from each other, you work together? Why dredge that up? I guess I almost felt the opposite. Like, dredge it up because that's her deepest held belief. And if she holds that and sees me that way and never says it, then she's kind of holding back. Now, materially speaking, it doesn't result in a public policy that makes it harder for me to live my life. But I find that it deepened our relationship to know she really cares about me. And in her worldview, I have a major problem on the horizon. And we have to be able to talk about that. I would say that's like one example. On a totally different spectrum, if you look at the crisis or series of crises in the Middle East, there are some really interesting academics and some colleagues of mine in Israel and in the Palestinian territories who will talk about how many of the peace processes have been a convening of the liberals from both sides. Like, you've probably heard the joke, like, your heretics and our heretics, they'll get together and they'll sign a heretical deal. But for some people, and I would say growing majorities even, or growing towards majority in both Palestinian society and Israeli Jewish society, you have people who say, I can't agree to those borders because my deal about borders is with someone upstairs. Like, that's who gave us this land. I can't end all claims to this territory because it was given to me by God. Or my goal isn't a peace agreement that maximizes individual rights and liberties. I actually want community obligations. I don't want individual liberties. That's not what I'm about. And so what do you do with those people? Like, they don't honor international boundaries and they don't aspire for more individual rights. They're not liberals. They're not neoliberals. They're like illiberals. And people don't want them at the table because it's offensive. It's outside the norms. There won't be peace there or here unless those people are included on their terms, not on our terms, in the debate about the future.
Well, I know that you have a friend who is an Egyptian whose father fought in the Egyptian-Israel war back in the day.
His uncles.
Sorry. But your uncles also fought in that war on the other side, and you two have become friends. I have friends in Israel, very good friends, who are very anti-Netanyahu, and I have others who are very, very pro what's happening with the Zionist movement. I try to hold my middle ground with it, but I find it difficult. I will fully admit that I find it difficult because I'm not pro-Zionist, but that doesn't make me an anti-Semite. To me, it's like, that's such a daft idea. And by the way, brown people from the Middle East are Semites. So let's get that out of the way. They're not Jews. They are brown people born in that area. And most of the Jews in Israel are whiteys, like me and you.
Actually, I would say about half of the Jews in Israel now are those brown Semites. Nearly half are from North Africa, Persia, the Arab world, which is in a whole other conversation. But yes, Saad Solomon and I, we met at a bridging conference, actually, that I was facilitating for corrections officers and people who are formerly incarcerated. This would be another example of not that kind of lightweight kumbaya coming together, but these two groups, they really hate each other. They're really pit against each other. If you live in prison and you work in prison, you are not friends by policy and by culture. So I was facilitating a gathering of those two constituent groups to see if they could find each other's humanity, if they could open up, be a little vulnerable with each other. Could you find not just like common ground, easy solutions, but could you find big breakthrough solutions to the criminal justice crisis in our country? And Saad is formerly incarcerated. He is one of the participants. And at the opening dinner, as we got to talking, he talked about the journey that led him to incarceration. It had to do with his father becoming radicalized when his three uncles were killed fighting the Israelis in 1967. And Dov, he told the story, and I convinced myself in that moment to not say anything, like to duck. Thanks, let's have dessert. This could not go well here. And so I convinced myself as the facilitator, I should stay quiet. I didn't want to alienate someone as a professional. I didn't need to get into my personal baggage. And then it just blurted out. And I said, well, frankly, like my uncles served in the Israeli army and we have a picture of them capturing an Egyptian tank. And honestly, in the shadow of the Holocaust, I was proud that we could defend ourselves. I was proud that we had an army that could protect Jews. And it felt like an eternity after I said it. Maybe I held my breath. And he finally said, like, oh, well, thanks for sharing that. There's a lot there. And that night when we said goodnight, he leaned over and he whispered, Shalom. And I was like, well, who is this guy? So then on October 7th, 2023, people know what happened. Hamas attacked Israel. And one of the first people to text me was Saad. And he said, I'm just thinking about you and wanted to make sure you were okay. That led to me organizing a delegation to Israel and the Palestinian territories that next February. And he was the first person I asked, like, would you come with me on this trip? And he went. And since then, he and I have done a lot of speaking in high schools and colleges. And we've actually taught a class together at the University of North Carolina called Courageous Conversations, Israel and Palestine on campus. And the truth is, we don't agree. We were raised in very different stories and we were educated with different facts even. But I think we're both deeply committed to the idea that our uncles were literally at war. And could it be that our children would consider each other friends and would care about each other and look out for each other, even if we still disagree about some of the fundamental issues at play in Israel?
So you brought up phenomenal examples that still seem, of course I'm projecting here, but may seem to the listener to seem impossible. They seem like they're a good idea, maybe a story, but how do you get across that gap that isn't where's the common ground, but where's the massive diversion from each other, and how do we build a bridge across that? Honestly, it seems impossible to probably most people who are listening. They're like, yeah, you know what? I am never going to be friends with a Trump supporter. I'm no longer talking to my uncle or whoever it is because he supports Trump or he supports whatever it is, or this person's voted for Biden. And how can you possibly? They become absolutes. I'm a Christian nationalist and everybody else is going to hell. There seems to be no place to build that bridge. Talk to us about this. You call it courageous conversations. I call it impossible conversations.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. So I guess I can relate to the listener who feels that way because most of my career was spent that way. Like, I think my job for many years was to convince people they were wrong about how they understood the world and that they should be more like me. Like, I joke now that I believed in social change and everyone else should change, but I didn't have to. I saw the problem. I saw this problem on this issue and this problem, and I knew the answers, right? I had a playbook and I could give you the answer, and I could demonize the person who saw it differently, the leader of that movement. I could caricature them, drive rage against them, make them an irredeemable villain. Like, I was trained to do that. I knew how to do that. And that filters into then how you understand everything, literally.
Exactly.
I'll tell you a very personal story. It wasn't an act of courage that led me to make this change. On some level, maybe it was I had nothing left to lose. So I had an important job. I was a president of a progressive foundation. I was like a somebody in progressive politics and like that whole other story, but I lost my job. And I was embarrassed. I was kind of humiliated like anyone is who has a public position and then loses it. But almost instantaneously, like within days, it's a little bit embarrassing, but I was talking to my executive coach and he said, close your eyes. So embarrassing. Close your eyes, go deep inside. Where do you feel it? It's like, oh, in my stomach. He's like, oh, what color is it? It's like green. It's like kryptonite. He's like, go inside it. What does it smell like and feel like? And he's like, and now what? Open your eyes. And I opened my eyes and I was like, it's like the golden handcuffs have been released. I don't have to play a role anymore. I can be who I want to be. And this was not a rational conclusion. It was like, it just emerged from me. And what I saw in that moment was that I'd gotten into this community organizing stuff out of the Jewish communist background that we talked about. I'd gotten into it because I believed everyday people could make history. That's where I started. And 20 years later, I had lost that dedication to the everyday person. I had become more focused on being right and winning. And when I lost my job, it's like I had to kind of reinvent myself. And so I went out and spent a lot of time with the people I had demonized, with white working class conservatives, with corporate business leaders, with ultra-Orthodox Jews, the groups who were the other to me in my progressive story. And frankly, it changed my life because what I had done for a long time was I had put my progressive politics as the singular lens through which I understood everything. And if you didn't share my lens, you didn't get it, right? And so I was pretty certain. And then one day that drifted aside and it was like, whoa, there's so many competing ways to understand the situation. The problems are so complex. My values haven't shifted, but how to understand these problems and how to solve them, I'm awake to the fact that it's not that simple anymore and that maybe I'm less dedicated to having the resume of someone who was a change maker and instead being drawn to actually making change. So when you say they seem like impossible conversations, I did have like a spiritual leap to want to go at it differently. I'm happy to talk more about practically how do you do it, because I still have to figure out what do you do when the person is in front of you and you disagree with them. But for me, what came first was that out of having nothing left to lose professionally, the space to come at the world differently, I still had to learn how. And for some people, learning the how will come before or instead of a deeper transformation. But for me, that was the start.
And I really want to get in part two of the show. I want to talk about the how, because I think it's profoundly important, because again, most people are holding it as impossible, and what you put forward, it makes it not impossible, makes it graspable, at least with the willingness. Because willingness on its own, I always say that you can be willing, not able, you can be able, but not willing. You have to be both. But what you talked about there that I think is really important is this was 2016 when you had this awakening, right?
Yeah, a little bit before, 2014.
So now you've worked it with the liberal, you've worked with the Obama stuff, and then you've got this rise of Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump and a polarizing political atmosphere. She's calling him a basket of deplorables, and he's doing what he's doing, definitely not looking for any gap, any bridge. And as you and I talked about in our previous conversation, most people in America at that time were looking for something new. They believed it was Obama because it was hope and change. And then they saw it was not going to be different with Hillary Clinton. And along comes this guy who seems to speak like they do, even though he has no background that's similar to theirs. He speaks in, quote, plain language, 5th and 6th grade language. And it appeals because it's different from the usual rhetoric. But it's during that sort of build up to that, you've gone away from politics, you've gone away from making them, the others, wrong. What I find interesting about that piece is that you just described is something I tell my clients is vastly important, and that is this, is that the greatest gift you'll ever have is going to feel like the worst thing that ever happened to you, and that is called an identity crisis. The moment your identity is threatened, it feels like all the walls go up, the shields go up, the armor comes out, and you will fight to protect an identity that might not actually be yours. It may have been given to you, you've taken it on, and then something can happen that makes it different. And what you've just described to me was like your identity got shattered. And the result of that, for most people, they tried to glue Humpty Dumpty together again. I'm better now, as opposed to saying, what else is there besides this? I have a meme that's on social media, it's been there for years, and it's me holding a white card, and it says, I used to be enlightened, but I'm all right now. And it was that old identity that I had, right? And it's like, what absolute bullshit. But I had to fall off a mountain to realize that identity was bullshit. And so you talk about that in that way. The question I want to go into to end this part with is, do you think that that's what has to happen for us generally? Do we have to give up the identity we have in order to have these courageous conversations, these, quote, impossible conversations?
I talk a lot about what I call strong back and soft front.
Let's go there in part two of the show. I'm loving this conversation. Thank you so much. Please tell our listeners where they can find out more about you, about all the resources you have, all the work that you're doing.
Unfortunately, I'm not that easy to find, but I am on LinkedIn. That's the best place to find me, and you can reach out to me there. I'm happy to follow up with anyone who's interested.
Well, we'll make sure that we post the links to that, and we'll be back in just one click for more of our delicious conversation with the amazing Simon Greer.